Okay, so if you've done front-end development for any amount of time, then you know that JavaScript frameworks are a really big deal. It's common to learn frameworks and do them on a day-to-day basis in a development job these days, and some people end up just learning a framework and bypassing vanilla JavaScript completely. Because that's the case, it's easy to miss the whole reason that JavaScript frameworks exist in the first place. So I'm going to take you through that today. And the goal is, by understanding the problem that JavaScript frameworks solve, they'll be easier to learn and will help you become a better developer. So we're going to tackle two parts. Number one, a brief history of JavaScript, and number two, the problem that JavaScript frameworks actually solve. In order to understand the problems that JavaScript frameworks solve, we have to throw it back a little bit to 1995 when JavaScript was created. It was created by Brendan Eich in 10 days as a kind of proof of concept of a scripting language that could run in the browser. And even though he only created it as a proof of concept, that version of the language ended up getting incorporated into the Netscape Navigator browser. And because of that, JavaScript has its many quirks, and if you've worked in the language, then you're probably well aware of them. But because of that, JavaScript had quite a few issues. Number one, because of browser wars, there was no standardization. So Internet Explorer had their version, Netscape had their version, there were a few others. And so the first problem to solve was having an international standard, which happened in November 1996 when ECMA International took over the standards for JavaScript. If you've ever heard of ES, for example, ES6, that is ECMAScript 6, which is specifically talking about the specification of the international version of JavaScript. Now, even though there was a standards body at that point, JavaScript still had a lot of issues. For one thing, there's all the quirks I mentioned, but also JavaScript was considered kind of a toy language. It wasn't considered a serious programming language, and there was actually a pretty large gap between ES versions. So from 1999 to 2009, there was no new ES version. There was an ES4 that got scrapped due to politics, but JavaScript just kind of languished for about 10 years. 2009 was a turning point for JavaScript. First of all, ES5 came out, and also the first version of Node was released. That set the stage for the resurgence of JavaScript, which we're still experiencing today. In 2010, the first frameworks came out, and of course now we have things like Angular and React and server-side development with Node and the Jamstack and Gatsby and all the various things and amazing things that make it an awesome ecosystem and really fun to develop in. But it's easy to think that, hey, the whole reason these things evolved is just to make a nicer development experience. There are actually a core set of problems, and one problem in particular that JavaScript frameworks evolved to solve. Right, so let's talk about the problem that JavaScript frameworks solve. So the problems throughout this whole time were that, number one, JavaScript was not that fun to write. If you've ever written a significant amount of vanilla JavaScript, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's hard, it's long, it's brittle, it's not very fun to maintain. It's just a lot of work to do a lot of direct work on the DOM, as well as all the other quirks of the language. jQuery made a lot of things easier and gave a bunch of utilities for helping out with common tasks. There was one central thing that it didn't solve, and that was that there was no great way to share data globally. So if you think about, for example, if we have an e-commerce app and we add something to the cart, the fact that the cart has something in it is a global state. Or if you're logged into an app, that's a global state. So you want to be able to access this data from any other place in the app. And that was really, really hard with vanilla JavaScript up until JavaScript frameworks came out. It's easy to think that the reason we have frameworks, as I said, is for nicer development experience or for components, which makes faster development and more reuse and all the other various benefits, but this is the main central issue. And understanding that this is the main issue can make you a better developer. Principally because when your main goal is managing data in an efficient, safe, and fast way, that informs the rest of your development. Principally, frameworks exist to solve this problem, managing data, managing state, and doing so in a way that is predictable and hopefully more fun for us. So that's a quick history lesson. I hope this was informative to you and helpful in some way. If you enjoy what I'm putting out, consider subscribing, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.